Hello and welcome to the Herdline Podcast, hosted by Trace Johnson and the Herds Headset. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode where the Headset and Trace talk all things Marshall athletics. Be sure to follow us on X and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Now, sit back, relax, and let's talk the herd.
Welcome back to the Herdline Podcast. Trace and the Herds Headset with you as we're getting ready to, as a matter of fact, close out Season 1. I figured, well, we're at 40 episodes, so might as well close out Season 1. And now that we're getting into 2026 football for the Herd, we figured that was a good time to do it. We're going to have a lot of episodes coming up with football coverage and previews, and we're going to do weekly, game previews and then weekly wrap-ups and all that, what stuff you would expect. We're going to do that, and then some. Who knows what we'll get into, but this will be the last episode of Season 1, technically, and this is a really cool one because it really kind of hits on our past, obviously, but it also hits on the game coming up because our season opening game is at Penn State, Power Conference opponent. And this episode, we are going to be looking at Marshall's history against Power Conference opponents. I don't know, however you want to label it, Power 4, Power 2, BCS. I don't care what you want to call it, but that's just what I'm going to say. Power Conference, easy enough. So as you all know, we've had a lot of success and a lot of history with competing against and beating Power Conference opponents. We're going to dive into that today. To get y'all hyped up for the Penn State game even more because, we were just talking about it. We think we have a chance to compete in that game. We're not going to give away anything yet as far as our previews and stuff, but we definitely think we can compete in that game. But before we start, how's things been going for you, man?
Man, been going great, and we are almost there. Like, the finish line is in sight. Football season's right around the corner, and like in 3 weeks, we're playing. I mean, it's game time. We're going to be up there in Happy Valley, and it's going to be awesome. And, like you said, this is a unique episode because we're kind of looking back at the past and trying to figure out, all right, do we even have a chance in this game against, say, a juggernaut of a program that, many would declare as Penn State. And quite frankly, there's all the experts don't even have Marshall even relatively close. I mean, it is not even – we're not even on the forefront of anybody's mind. But, before we even started recording, you said it best. I mean, that's pretty much how we like it because we would rather you underestimate us than try and over-prepare for us. And Marshall is a program by history standards, even recent history standards that we'll talk about here today, that if you're not prepared and if you're, just going to take it not very seriously, we will definitely take advantage of that. And not just make it close, but, Marshall's done it time and time again. They've beaten some of these premier programs. So it should be a good conversation today, reminiscing on some of these old games, but also looking towards the future of like, hey, can we be able to do this? And so it should be a good conversation. I'm looking forward to it today.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like we were talking about before we started recording, a lot of these games we lost, but we gained probably more from losing it the way that we lost it than we gained a lot more than what we had coming into the game. And I think the same could possibly be coming for the Penn State game. Like I said, I'm not going to make any predictions or anything yet because we got a whole episode of that coming up in a couple weeks. So we're not going to get into that yet. But yeah, you can gain a lot of respect by going up against these really good programs and competing with them and pushing them to their limit. You can get a lot of respect from that. And Marshall's been able to do that in the past, along with winning a number of these games. That goes without saying, and we're going to talk about all that just momentarily. But yeah, I think we've got. Sleep on us. Why not? Just see how that turns out. I'm just saying, like Marshall's not even when Marshall's not a great football team, they can compete with these teams. They have done it. Like, we're going to talk about it. The great Marshall teams have competed well, but the not so great Marshall teams have competed just as well, quite frankly. So we're going to get into it. But looking at a couple games right off the bat here, I didn't really write down much about these games, but I just figured these are worth noting because they kind of tie into the whole like power conference thing. 1941, Marshall beats Wake Forest 16-6. We talked about that for the Cam Henderson when we talked about back in the day with Cam Henderson as the head coach. This was a huge win for Marshall. I don't know if Wake Forest was like ACC. That was like 70, 80 years ago. I don't know if they were or not, but still, that was a huge kind of landmark win for the program in those days. Looking at another game that happened in 1987, Marshall beats Louisville 34-31. But Louisville at that time was not like where they are now, but they were kind of classified. They were just an independent. They weren't even in a conference, but still that was a kind of another kind of a landmark win. We were a 1AA program. That was a big win for us. So I figured I better at least touch on a couple of those. And then some of these games we're getting ready to talk about, well, two of these games in particular during the 1AA era with Jim Donnan as the coach. Very, very good games that we unfortunately just fell a little bit short in. First one being back in 1991, Marshall goes on the road at number 11 North Carolina State, and Marshall has that game won the entire way until the last just few minutes of the game. Marshall was up 7-0 at the half, and then in the fourth quarter, they led 14-3. And you're thinking NC State, at that point, almost a top 10 team, was about to lose to a 1AA program. But unfortunately, NC State does end up getting the 15-14 win under some controversial calls by the officiating. NC State converted a 4th and long late in the game because Marshall was offsides. So they wouldn't have been able to have converted that had Marshall not been penalized for being offsides. So they got stopped, but then the penalty kept them alive. And I've heard that was kind of a wishy-washy, not real sound call to make at that time. And then, of course, they convert the next 4th down and end up getting the game-winning touchdown with 24 seconds to go in the game to win by 1. So that could have been monumental at that point. Monumental possibly win right there. Looking at another game against NC State, as a matter of fact, in 93, Marshall goes down there and plays them well again, loses 24-17. NC State has 2 late scoring drives in the final 10 minutes to win that game. Marshall was held scoreless in the second half. So that just kind of seemed like one of those games where they're a FBS 1A program. They have more depth. They have more, that type of deal. So we probably just kind of wore out because we didn't have the same, number of, the depth was just not comparable at that point from a 1AA school to a top 1A school. So another competitive game, though, against NC State right there. A few years later, we go – this time, we're not 1AA anymore. We're 1A. And in 97, we have one of a very, very good game that the team that we played, they had enough of us after this game. Talking about WVU, talking about you, WVU. Marshall goes up there and loses the game 42-31. But, man, let's just be honest. To say that they made them sweat would be an understatement. Marshall falls behind 28-3. So at that point, that's not going to get it done, especially on the road in a hostile environment. But then Marshall, to their credit, they rally all the way back. They take a 31-28 lead in the fourth quarter before 2 interceptions, 2 Chad Pennington interceptions. Now, this is his first starting action in 2 years. This is our first game at the 1A level. He throws 2 late interceptions, and then they turn into 14 points and win by 11. And Randy Moss really shows out in this game, 7 receptions for 85 yards and 2 touchdowns. Marshall had 4 turnovers. West Virginia had none. So Marshall was the better team, but they just got in their own way too many times, unfortunately. And that was a really close, that should have been a win. We just beat ourselves a lot in that game. And then they didn't want no more of the herd after that, as we know. So a couple of more games I want to talk about quickly before we move on to the 2000s. The 98 season, Marshall goes at South Carolina, and this is the famous game in Marshall history. Goes down there in the SEC country. South Carolina was not a very good team that year, but still it was an SEC team. We get a 24-21 win. Huge win. First ever win over an SEC opponent. Marshall ended up having they played really well in this game. They actually led 21-10 before South Carolina was able to come back and tie it up. And then in the last few seconds, well, actually the last couple minutes, Danny Derricott gets an interception to set Marshall up into field goal range. Billy Malashevitz hits a 37-yard game-winning field goal to win it. Hurricane boy, Billy Malashevitz, just saying. So that was nice, man. That was a huge win. Huge win. I mean, that was, at that point, probably our biggest non-conference win of all time. And then looking at the 99 season, before I turn it over to you for your takes on all these games, at Clemson, of course, another famous game in Marshall history. We go down there to Death Valley, season opener for Clemson. They got a new head coach. They're excited. Herd beats them 13-10. Low-scoring game. Marshall ended up they led 6-3 at the half, and it was just a bunch of field goals. Like, there was no touchdowns until the fourth quarter of this game. Clemson ended up taking the lead 10-6 in the fourth quarter. But then Marshall goes on one of the most legendary drives in program history where they were penalized like 5 times. They kept having to overcome the penalties. Chad Pennington had an amazing, him and James Williams was an amazing catch on the sideline, set that whole thing up. Jug Chapman has a game-winning touchdown run with just over a minute to go. Clemson gets into field goal range, though, to their credit, but misses it. Game-tying field goal. Marshall holds on, gets a massive win. So that's 2 straight years there that they went down to South Carolina and came out with big wins. They beat South Carolina and Clemson 2 consecutive years. I'm sure those people did not like that. So talk about those 90s games a little bit there, all the way back from NC State if you want, and all the way up through Clemson. Just what do you think about those games, and what did that do for Marshall's brand?
Well, I mean, you talk about the growth of a program. In the 80s, we saw a little bit of, hey, we can become a winning program. But in the 90s is whenever you saw the complete switch flipping. We were not just a program that was able to compete at a high level at the FCS level, but we could compete at the FBS, quote unquote. Wasn't called FBS at the time, but not just FBS, but with the power programs of the FBS. And, you got to give a lot of credit to some of those guys that created the culture. We've talked about it at length. Jim Donnan, we've talked with Bob Pruitt about the mentality that these teams had. And there was never a game by which I think that our guys would go into where they believed that they were going to lose. I mean, they truly believed that they were going to win, and they played like they were going to win. And, there for a while, I think that's kind of what had been missing with Marshall a little bit. There was a stretch there where it seemed like, you talk about these things all the time. They're playing like they weren't trying to lose instead of trying to win. We've heard that exact expression used many of times before, and it's been frustrating. But, back in those days, in the 90s especially, I mean, every single game they went in, they're playing to win. And so it kind of goes back to something that Bob Pruitt had mentioned. Again, I don't remember exactly what year this is. I might be kind of jumping the gun a little bit whenever they played Georgia. Mark Ritt gave the great, just compliment to the team that was like, guys, you all as fans are probably frustrated at the outcome because it was a close game. But what you don't understand is this, like that team is a SEC caliber team. And, back in those days, we might not have had much depth, and that's why we would lose some of those, games against the bigger programs. But overall, the starters and the guys that were on the front line, so to speak, they could compete with anybody, and they did. So, that is definitely just kind of what has been ingrained in every single Marshall fan's brain. There's not a game that we go in that we are nervous about, or not nervous, I should say, but we're scared. Penn State, it's like 105,000 people in the stadium, and I know they just renovated everything, and they just made the stadium like I don't know how many times higher than it used to be. But that didn't really scare me as a fan because I know my team, and I know that a lot of the times Marshall will also match the level of competition, and that's both good and bad. Because we've seen them go toe-to-toe with teams which they ought to just blow out. But then the very next week, they're going to go up against these power programs or, really good conference opponent and play them down to the wire. So, that's just kind of how Marshall has always been. And I look at the team that we've got right now, and I'm seeing that mentality return. nobody's really afraid to play against some of these big schools, these big guys, and that's something that as a fan I just appreciate. That speaks to Tony Gibson and just his ability to instill his culture in his kids and in the program that they've got. So, but whenever we talk about the start of that mentality, it's definitely those games that you just mentioned. I mean, beating Clemson in Death Valley, beating South Carolina on their own home field, going toe-to-toe with NC State. All of that ingrained in all of us as fans, even before I was born and even you were born, the overall just mindset of we can play with anybody. And it could be Ohio State, which we'll talk about that game probably here in just a little bit. It could be with Georgia. It could be with Clemson. We can play with anybody because that's just who we are. That's just who we are as a program.
Exactly. And, and I like that point you mentioned about, we're not afraid to play. We're not afraid to play anybody. Doesn't matter the situation. And that's so true. But even back in this day, I feel like that was even more like, I don't know, brash, because back then you didn't have the influx of transfer portal like you have now, where half of your roster could be made up of Power 4 guys now, that or former Power 4 guys, and you don't even think anything of it. Back then, that just wasn't the case. I'm not saying we didn't have an insane talent, because obviously we did. But nowadays, you'll have guys that have played at every level, it doesn't matter what conference it is. So it's a little bit not easier. I'm not remotely saying that, but it's just a different type of animal than it used to be. So back in the day, man, we had what we had. You couldn't go out and buy a player, you had to deal with what you had. So we made it work. Also worth noting as well, in 1999, Marshall also blanked Temple at home. They were in the Big East. I don't know how Temple was ever allowed to be in the Big East. They were absolutely horrendous. But still, I guess that technically counts as a power conference win, even though Temple was like one of the worst programs in the country. Just saying. So looking at the 2000s, getting into the 2000s, right off the bat, the very first year, we have two really close, really competitive losses to power conference opponents in the year 2000. First one being at number 24, Michigan State, where we end up losing 34-24, played them very well. It was 10-10 at the half, tied up. Michigan State ends up outscoring them 24-14 in the second half. So that was another one of those instances where depth probably caught up to us. Marshall had 4 turnovers. That definitely affected things. Leftwich, this was his first one of his first starts as the Marshall starting quarterback. He throws 3 picks. So that seems like a game again where we kind of beat ourselves. I mean, if you're given a top 25 team and a Big Ten team that many extra chances, they're going to beat you on their home field every time. So despite that, like, you could definitely make the case that we were right there as good as they were, that, right on the same level, honestly, based on that. So close loss there. And then another even closer loss after that. We go at North Carolina, lose 20-15. And there was a very controversial call in this game that ultimately possibly cost Marshall the game. Early in the game, one of UNC's receivers fumbled deep in his own territory, but it was ruled an incomplete pass. Even after they reviewed it, it was ruled an incomplete pass. And from what people have said and reports, they said that was definitely a fumble, and that would have given Marshall the ball, deep in North Carolina territory. And ultimately, you lose by 5. If you score a touchdown there, you probably win the game. So that was unfortunate. Marshall led 9-6 at the half. They were outscored 14-6 in the fourth quarter. So Marshall led the majority of the game until, just the last quarter. And it kind of, again, they just, you just kind of fizzle out a little bit in the end. But that call definitely went against them, hurt bad. So that whole season, obviously we turned it around that year and ended up winning the MAC championship again, despite our struggles that year. But one of those wins could have been huge for the program at that point. Looking a couple years down the road, about 3 years down the road, this is another one of the most, I would say, one of the most infamous games in Marshall history. At number 12, Tennessee, in 2003. I remember watching this game very, very vividly in my mind. Marshall goes down there, SEC country, 106,000, whatever it is, people, Rocky Top, the whole deal. They make them sweat bullets, but ultimately lose 34-24. Again, same score as Michigan State. Tennessee led 14-10 at the half. At that point, you're thinking, they'll pull away in the second half. That's, of course they're going to pull away second half. But then late in the third quarter, Stan Hill finds Josh Davis for a 65-yard touchdown that cut the lead to 28-24 with 1:19 left of the third quarter. And then that's when the infamous chest pump happens that just jacks up his knee horribly. Graham Goetner has to play in the fourth quarter. They just couldn't do anything offensively at that point. Tennessee adds 2 field goals in the fourth quarter to ultimately pull away and win by 10, 34-24. So that's another one of those what-if scenarios. What if Stan Hill doesn't get hurt in that game? Because if you look at his numbers in that game, he was lighting them up. An SEC defense that, a 10-win team, I think they won 10 games. He was lighting them up. So what could have happened if he hadn't got hurt and that he could have finished that game? You never know. You never know. So unfortunate there. But then looking at 2003 again, just a couple weeks later, Marshall has arguably its most signature win in program history based on, or at least overall ranking of the team that they beat. You go down to Kansas State, number 6 ranked team in the country. They've got Darren Sproles, future NFL superstar. They end up winning the Big 12 that year. Marshall beats Kansas State 27-20. Again, another game I remember vividly, just epic beyond words. Marshall led 16-10 at the half. Kansas State led 20-19 in the fourth quarter. But Graham Goetner, to his credit, he has to play in this game because of Hill, being dinged up still. He finds Jason Rader for a 3-yard touchdown with 3:34 left of the game, plus a 2-point conversion to give Marshall a 27-20 lead. And then Kansas State gets it down inside the 15 or inside the 10 from Marshall, but then it was 4th and goal, incomplete pass, game over. Marshall gets a massive win. Still the highest ranked team Marshall's ever beaten. They were number 6. Notre Dame was number 8. We'll get to that later. Marshall rushes for 210 yards in this game. I mean, crazy the way they were able to move bodies against this Kansas State team that did not lose a whole lot of games that year. I mean, they just didn't. So talk a little bit about these games we've just mentioned, the 2000 games against North Carolina, Michigan State, and then these 2 very famous and infamous games in 2003.
Well, you said it, they're famous and infamous, and realistically, there would become a drop-off after this particular run of Marshall football. It wouldn't be like it was. There's some close games that we'll talk about and we'll mention, but they were more few and far in between, it seemed, especially the winning side. As you mentioned, Kansas State, that's one of the premier wins that we've ever had here. One of the most fond memories to which we've ever had. Nobody gave us a shot, especially after, losing to Tennessee and, all that good stuff. But, and backup quarterback at that. And truthfully, too, Marshall at that time was known for being a passing offense. I mean, running was more complimentary, but it wasn't the focal point by any means. So the fact they were able to run the ball as effectively as they were is really amazing. And to get a win there, just all those games that you mentioned, it's all, even the ones you lose, it stings, and you wish it would be a little different, but still, it just shows again that the program had come so far from where it was 20 years ago. I mean, it's just insane to think about how quickly and how the meteoric rise of Marshall football really was. And, talking about this era, we got to talk with Mark Snyder not too long ago, and I remember him saying this in our interview that we had with him. He's the defensive coordinator, and I think 2004. 2004, I think, is whenever they went down there or up there. And so he's defensive coordinator over the Buckeyes, and he was mentioning that all the guys were pretty much just kind of nonchalant through practice. It wasn't high energy. I mean, it's Marshall coming in, and they won a bunch of MAC championships, but we beat these MAC teams every single year by 50 points. I mean, Ohio's got nothing on us, and Bowling Green and Buffalo and who else. But I remember Coach Snyder basically saying to the defensive side of things, like he said, guys, you don't really understand what you're about to go through. I was there at the university a while ago, but I know some of the guys and the people that are running the program. I know how they go about things and all of that stuff. So this is not going to be just a give me game. We're not going to just win the game because we are Ohio State. We're going to have to play the game, and we're going to have to be able to execute. And, unfortunately for us, they were able to do so really towards the end of the game. Marshall kind of had that thing won, but sadly just couldn't put it away. But I think that just speaks to the overall mentality, the overall length that the program has gotten and was at that particular time. They were a force to be reckoned with. And again, it goes to show that, we can play just about anybody. It doesn't matter where you're from, because it's a common denominator. Marshall's played close with teams down in SEC country. We played close with teams up north in Big Ten country. We played with people out in the Big 12 as well. Every single opponent and every single place in the entire country, we have played well at the bare minimum. So, again, I look at this team heading into this Penn State game, and I know we'll talk more about it. I don't want to go all in depth just yet, but it still is this. It has a feeling that's very similar to another game that we're going to talk about here very soon, and you just never know. That's why we play the game, right? That's why we go out there. That's why we lace them up and strap them up and give it a shot, because you can be Penn State, you can be Ohio State, you can be whoever you want to be. But you're still going to have to play Marshall and beat them. You're just not going to win just because you have a history of winning, because we got a history of winning too. So we'll give you our best shot, no doubt.
We're going to give everybody our best shot no matter what. And I like what you said earlier, because, yeah, we definitely have played up to our competition. We've also played down to it a whole lot as well. That's just so true. I mean, it just is. But, I mean, yeah, let's just look at it like this. I mean, all these games we talked about so far have only gone through 2003. From 1991 to 2003 is what we've talked about. That's 12 years. I mean, their rise to getting to that point where they're consistently competing with the nation's best was pretty dang quick. I mean, this wasn't something that's been built over 30, 40, 50 years. It happened in like a decade. Like, you're there, like... I mean, from the time they played NC State in 91, they beat South Carolina in 98. They beat Clemson in 99. I mean, that's like 7-8 years apart. Like, it happened pretty quick. And you got to give a whole lot of credit to Jim Donnan and Bob Pruitt for that, because they set the foundation and they ran with it, and they were able to do these types of things. So looking to 2004 now, and you kind of mentioned it a minute ago, another one of the biggest what ifs probably in Marshall football history. They go at number 9 Ohio State, and I vividly remember watching it. I mean, it was some of these games. It's like just like it just happened yesterday. And they go play them very well. Unfortunately, come up on the short end just by the thinnest of margins by a 55-yard field goal. Marshall loses 24-21 to Ohio State. That was a great game despite the close loss. Buckeyes were up 7 at the half. Marshall was hanging around. Jonathan Goddard had that fumble return for a touchdown, which was amazing. Marshall just keeps it close, really close the whole game. And then, I think they kind of shocked everybody there at one point about midway through the fourth quarter. Stan Hill hits Brad Bates for a 23-yard touchdown that ties the game at 21, 8:40 to go of the game. And I think that was right after an interception that Marshall had gotten. Chris Royal had just got a pick. And then after that, he gets another pick. And you're thinking, man, what if Marshall goes down here and takes the lead right now? Like with a couple, but unfortunately, they just couldn't quite get there. And then towards the end of the game, they had a bad punt, and that kind of gave Ohio State a shorter field. And you didn't need a short field for a field goal kicker that had that kind of leg that Mike Nugent had. And he nails a 55-yarder with 0 seconds on the clock remaining after, it was as time expires, a walk-off kick, and they win 24-21. But, I mean, man, at that point, you knew that Ohio State, if you're an Ohio State fan, you knew you really got lucky and snuck out of that game by the skin of your teeth. I'll tell you that, because that Marshall about had them that game. They really did. Unfortunately, how it turned out. And then the next week, they go on the road at number 3 Georgia. They're playing Ohio State and Georgia consecutively. That is nuts. I mean, and you go down there to Athens and, 13-3, you lose to, David Pollock on Georgia. Mark Richt was the coach. I mean, number 3, a 10-win team. Like, you go down there and they get 1 touchdown on you in 4 quarters. And an entire game, they score 1 touchdown on you. And you played really well. You just couldn't get enough going offensively. It was 10-3 at the half. Georgia was up 10-3. Marshall scored first, as a matter of fact, 3-0, and had numerous chances to put points on the board in that game. Just didn't quite get over the hump. Georgia was tremendous defensively, of course. They knocked in a field goal in the fourth quarter that set the final score at 13-3. So Marshall just couldn't quite get over the hump in that one. But that's the game that Pruitt talked about with us, saying that Mark Richt said, in the post game to fans that was an SEC caliber team that we just played. So Marshall was, just as strong, just as physical to hold up against a team like that. So that's 2. You're playing number 9 Ohio State, number 3 Georgia, and you lose to them by a total of 13 points. That's pretty crazy. And that 04 Marshall team wasn't even a great team. If you look at that season, they won 6 games. They weren't even that great, but man, they really rose to the challenge. So got to give them a lot of credit there. And then looking at 2005, the next season at home, second home game of the year, Marshall has a golden opportunity at home to beat a Big 12 program. Again, Kansas State comes to the Joan this time, and they had a 2-for-1 series at the time. 03, they go down there and beat them. But 05, Kansas State comes to the Joan. At that point, biggest crowd in the history of the stadium. It was 36,000, 37,000 almost. Huge crowd. And we had them on the ropes. We really did. Kansas State, to their credit, they fell behind early, but then rallied back to take the lead 21-13 at the half. But then Marshall scores a touchdown early fourth quarter that made it 21-19, misses the 2-point conversion. But then late in the game, Kansas State's trying to run out the clock. They're trying to just get out of there. They fumble. Marshall gets the ball back. They set it up perfectly to where you're within a 40-yard field goal to win the game. And of course, we know Mark Snyder talked about this, that this is one of his, if not his biggest coaching regret, that this happened the way that it did. Jimmy Skinner ends up calling an audible or whatever it was. They were going to run the ball, try to center it to kick the field goal. He throws a pass and it's intercepted. Just absolutely heart-wrenching, horrible way to lose a game. So 21-19, Marshall loses to Kansas State. And that was also a game in which Marshall had 2 fumbles inside the plus 10-yard line. And you lose by 2. Obviously Marshall was the better team. It just did not work out that way. They beat themselves. And that just really sucks really bad, but it is what it is. It sucked. And a couple other games before we move on to the next set. These, to your point, you said that they kind of the competitive games and the wins against these types of teams were starting to become more few and far between after this. A couple games that stand out to me: 07 against WVU. They were number 3 at the time in the country. Steve Slayton and Pat White were on that team. Marshall plays them really well. They're winning at the half. This is in Huntington. And then they're only down 4 heading into the fourth quarter. But then WVU goes on they just turn it on and win big at the end, 48-23. They had 21 unanswered points. And then 2008, this is kind of funny in a way. They go on the road at number 11 Wisconsin. Marshall goes up 14-0 in this game at Wisconsin. Wisconsin only counters with 51 unanswered points. I'm just saying, 51-14 loss. So I just thought that's kind of funny. And then 2009 at WVU, Marshall's up 7-3 at the half. They're playing really well, but then they don't do anything in the second half, lose 24-7. So another game where you kind of just fell apart there and when it counted the most. So talk about those games there, because there's a whole lot to talk about.
Yeah, no doubt. There definitely is. And this is where we kind of see like a drop off. Obviously, this would be a very tough stretch beginning really in 2003 and onward. It wouldn't just be what we were used to seeing. We would get these wins every now and then, but I say every now and then, but like almost every single year, it seemed that we were getting some type of win. And again, the competition level that Pruitt was wanting to go after and getting on the schedule was unreal. Like these are some of the best schedules that we've ever had, even whenever we were still at the later end of the MAC and whatnot. So, but looking back at it, lots of blunders, lots of almosts. Could have been, should have been, but it wasn't. And I hate that it wasn't, because those wins really could have put Marshall at a completely different level than what we are at this present moment. I mean, they just could have. Whenever you are raking up these national important wins every single season or every other season at bare minimum, you are in the same conversation as a Boise State would be now. And truthfully, though, I mean, looking back, Marshall was basically in that conversation. They were a national sweetheart. Everybody loved them. ESPN was here all the time. Heisman candidate trophies. We were the little guy. I think America's team in a lot of instances and cases. But for whatever reason, we can talk about all the reasons if we wanted to. We have at length before, but it just didn't work out that way. There was a lot of mistakes, bad leadership at the top, unfortunate circumstances that coaches found themselves in. And so those close games and the winning of those games had a drop-off for a significant amount of time. And I think really what kind of put Marshall back a long time was that Wisconsin game that you mentioned. I mean, you go up 14-0, and that's like the first game of the season. If I remember correctly, I was watching on TV. I can remember they made a big deal, like their student section coming at the end of the first quarter or something like that. They're always late. So, I think Marshall really capitalized on that. But when that student section got in, man, it was just over. And I think that really was a narrative of just where we were. It just wasn't close anymore. It wasn't even in the same vicinity like it had been for a while. So, it's tough sledding here, and it's going to get a little bit even more tough as we talk about the 2010s, because, I mean, you start out the 2010s probably with the most gut-wrenching moment in all of Marshall football history. And I'm sure we'll have to talk about it, even though I'm going to have PTSD about it. But still, there was some silver linings too. We're going to talk about, I'm sure, win against Louisville. They were Big East at the time. Teddy Bridgewater, that was awesome. No, well, I won't steal your thunder. I know that you've got a list here, but still, this is whenever we saw a little bit of a drop off. But that's going to be a resurgence before too long, and it's really interesting. We're kind of in that resurgence right now, which is kind of cool. But let's keep going though. I don't want to outpace ourselves, although I am excited to get there.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of exciting things to talk about moving forward. And to your point there, the late 2000s, early 2010s, that was when it was more tough sledding. We used to be able to be consistently, we'd get a win or two every couple of years in these types of games. They just didn't really come at this point very often. But to your point, we're going to talk about that Louisville game. But, I had to mention the 2010 game against WVU, number 23 WVU. I mean, that's easily one of the two most painful losses in Marshall football history, right there with the Western Kentucky game in 2014. I don't know which is worse. This one might be worse. This one might be worse because the only thing that 2014 game against Western cost us was a chance to play in the New Year's Six, the Peach Bowl. I don't think we were going to even play in it regardless, because we were already ranked behind Boise State at that point, and I don't think they were going to put us ahead of them because they didn't respect our schedule. But this game, this could have changed everything. I mean, they could have totally changed everything. Could have, imagine if your first game for Doc Holliday as a head coach at home, you beat WVU for the first time ever for Marshall's program, would have been amazing, miraculous, would have been epic beyond words. But unfortunately, we blow a 15-point fourth quarter lead, lose 24-21 in overtime. Not even going to get any more details than that. That's all you're getting from me on that one. So the next year, talked about it a minute ago, at Louisville in 2011, and this was a huge point of the season because we were really on the struggle bus this point. We were 1-3 heading into this game. And, if we lose this one, we're 1-4. Like there's no chance they're going to any kind of bowl game or anything this year. We go to Louisville, who was still trying to find themselves a little bit at this time. Charlie Strong was their head coach. They had a freshman, Teddy Bridgewater. Our freshman, Rakeem Cato, beats their freshman, Teddy Bridgewater, 17-13. Really good performance. Louisville's up at the half, 13-7. But Marshall really, really shuts them out in the second half. 10-0. Marshall outscores them in the second half. The game-winning touchdown, Rakeem Cato to C.J. Crawford, who was an underrated tight end for us, 3-yard touchdown with 1:49 to go, puts us up 17-13. And then we have an interception and then on the next Louisville drive that seals the game. And that was a Louisville team that ended up being the Co-Big East champion in 2011. So not a bad team at all. And Marshall goes there and beats them. And they really needed that win because Marshall went 6-6 that year, ultimately 7-6 after a bowl win. But if you don't get this win, you don't get to a bowl game. So it was a big win for us. Great win there for sure. And then I wanted to mention as well in 2012, this is a game that a lot of people don't remember or don't talk about. But 2012, we go at Purdue. This was the first game of that home-and-home series, which we'll talk a lot more about the other game later. But we go to Purdue, and we absolutely stink up the joint in the first half. It's like 42-14 at the half. We look horrible. But boy, howdy, we turn it on in the second half. We come all the way back and almost win that game, 51-41. We lost, a 10-point loss, but we were a lot closer than people think of winning that game. And that was a game, I believe, that Tommy Schuler had 19 catches for 200 yards or something crazy, and Cato had probably 400 yards. I mean, if we just don't completely self-destruct in the first half, we win that game. That would have been a huge win at that time, but unfortunately it didn't turn out that way. But I wanted to talk about that one real quick as well. And then a couple more games before we look at the next series of games. 2013 had a couple really impressive performances against ACC opponents. And the first one being a loss, unfortunately, but man, we could not have done a whole lot more than we did in this game. Regular season at Virginia Tech in Lane Stadium. We lose 29-21 in 3 overtimes. Just another gut-wrenching performance. We played so well in this game. We led at the half. We led the entirety of the second half, really. And then they ended up tying the game at 21, kind of late in the fourth quarter. They had it 4th and goal. And that was the game. That was the play where Darryl Roberts had that really great break on the ball. And he tips it, and it just lands right in the receiver's hands for Virginia Tech. Just brutal, unlucky stuff. I mean, he could not have played that any better. And then, we have a chance in the overtime period. I don't remember if it was the first or the second overtime to win the game with a field goal. And it was rainy and nasty, so it was a little bit of a tall ask at that point. But we could have won the game with a field goal, and it got blocked. And then Tech ends up winning. And even in the third overtime, we had it 4th down. We had to, convert or score a touchdown or 1 or 2. Cato throws an absolute dart in the back of the end zone to Devontae Allen, and it just slips out of his hands. I mean, it was right there. I mean, if we score there and go get the 2-point conversion, we're going to another overtime. So they just kind of found ways to lose in that one. And that was unfortunate because at that point, the program was starting to turn the corner to get to a really good place, but we hadn't quite got there yet. I think if that game was a season or 2 later, we probably win that game. But because of when it was, it didn't work out. And then the last game of that year, talk about regarding the Power Conference opponents, was Maryland. We've talked about that game extensively on here. The Military Bowl. We play a solid Maryland team basically in their backyard in Annapolis. We beat them 31-20. Great game. That was our last game as an ACC member before moving to the Big Ten. Herd's up by 4 at the half. Maryland gets a brief lead at the beginning of the fourth quarter. They take the lead. That was their only lead of the game. And then Marshall immediately comes back, takes the lead back, and they scored 14 points in the fourth quarter and just played really well. Cato won his best game probably ever. Gator Hoskins couple touchdowns. That was great stuff. So really good to see them start. That was their first ACC win in a long time. And, they were starting to turn the corner. So talk about those games there a little bit.
Yeah, so now we're seeing the trajectory going back up. Doc Holliday comes in, redefines the entire program. Mario Harvey mentioned it when we talked with him. He said, "Man, there's a difference in just the coaching style. It was no playing around with Doc, and you're going to work hard." And we saw the results come back on the field, and the toughness that the Marshall teams that we would know from the past in the 90s and 2000s kind of retake shape. You mentioned the West Virginia game. Of course, that's probably the worst. That's the worst loss that Marshall's ever had. I mean, it just is. Western Kentucky stunk, and it wasn't good. I hope that never happens again. Don't get me wrong, but losing to West Virginia in that particular way, that's the most deflating thing that I think has ever happened to Marshall. And if Mark Snyder was able to win that game, man, that's a great what if of what would have happened to the program. I think that it would have looked drastically different. I think that he would have found his footing, and I think it would have gone in a very positive direction. But again, we don't live in that reality, so we live in the reality. It just wasn't in the cards. But they kept it close against a ranked opponent. Again, we like that. We take a win with that. Even though it's against West Virginia. I hate that. But then you go on and you play Louisville in 2013 or no, 2011. 2011, sorry. And they weren't necessarily the power program just yet. They were still in the Big East, and I believe that was actually the transition year of the Big East where like you kind of got rid of some of the better programs, and they were kind of in limbo waiting for some other programs to come in before they were able to go over to the ACC and whatnot. So, I don't know if you really want to call that a power win or not. You could argue either way. But still, I mean, looking at that one, Marshall had no business being in the game. I mean, they got off to an awful start, and Cato, he threw a lot of interceptions that first year. He was young. He's a gunslinger, made lots of mistakes. But, because he was a gunslinger, he wasn't afraid to throw the rock. He was able to work out on that day, and had a big win there. A game that, again, Marshall just was not favored at all. I mean, they shouldn't have been in the game, shouldn't have been, a winner, let alone even really that close. But they found a way, and so that was a big moment. I think that us as fans were like, hey, this Cato guy, he's pretty good, and that the rest of the year would be up and down, but we knew that. We had seen the flashes. We had seen that he is capable of putting the team on his back. And then, man, that Virginia Tech game in 2013, man, what a game that was. I know the rain was pouring down. It was miserable conditions. Like you mentioned, 3 overtimes. Marshall probably should have won it about 4 times, but just couldn't catch the ball there at the last play of the game. Like you mentioned, the tipped pass that ended up just landing in the guy's hands for Virginia Tech. So, but still, you're going up against a team that on paper, again, you should not be really close with. And you're seeing that upward trajectory, almost like it was in the 90s, where, they couldn't quite just scrape it out, but they were in the game. And so Marshall was becoming Marshall again. And we were seeing them be able to play football on the highest of levels. And again, we would see another kind of dip a little bit, not crazy, because, I mean, we're going to talk about it in a moment, Purdue win, fantastic win, one of the most fun memories. I don't really know if it's like one of the best wins what we've ever had, but it was just really fun. There's that game, and then moving forward, there's a couple more until the 2020s where we see things really kind of turn around. But they're heading back on the right track, and they're getting that toughness, and they're getting the confidence. I think that was the biggest thing. I think that Marshall football overall just lost its confidence. I think that they went into a lot of games just saying, hey, I just hope we're close today, boys. I don't know if we're probably not going to win. I just hope we can make it close. But whenever you had Cato come in and you had Doc Holliday in there, you saw that transformation take place of, hey, we're here to stay, and we're not messing around. Like we're going to try and get back that confidence that the teams of old had, and that they got it back. Another game too that we'll talk about as well is probably Cincinnati too. That was another great win. So you're seeing all of these things kind of come to fruition, and Marshall's becoming Marshall again. It was good times, very good days.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And the game we're getting ready to talk about, we talked about 2015 against Purdue. Yeah, amazing game. But man, here's one thing that I don't think gets talked about enough is what if the 2014 Marshall team had gotten a crack at a team like that, like a Big Ten team, an ACC team, an SEC team? What if they had gotten a chance? Because if you remember, that was the second game of the Louisville home and home that started in 2011 was supposed to be in 2014. They would have been coming to the Joan in 2014. Could you imagine how hyped that would have been? We're probably a top 25 team when we play them. They could have been a top 25 team. I don't know. That would have been insanely hyped. And if we go and beat Louisville that year, that totally changes our perception completely, because our whole perception that year was, yeah, they got a lot of good players and they're great, but they don't play anybody. If we had played Louisville that year, that would have changed the perception of the team. And unfortunately, we'll never get to know, because that was, the 2014 Marshall team is one of the most loaded teams in history from Marshall football. So I would have loved to have seen them get a big crack at somebody like that. But unfortunately, just didn't work out. But looking at 2015 against Purdue, you mentioned it. We've talked about it extensively as well, like everybody else has. Marshall gets one of the best football games I've ever seen by far. Marshall beats Purdue 41-31, a 2-win Purdue team. Not a good Purdue team at all, but that really wasn't the point. The point was it's a Big Ten team coming to Huntington for the first time ever, and us getting a win over a Big Ten opponent for the first time ever. That's the narrative. That's the only thing that mattered. It could have been an 0-12 team, but if you're into, that narrative still would have rang true. And what a game it was. I just tweeted the other day, 23 years of going of Marshall games. That's still my favorite game I've been to. Just absolutely incredible game. The bookend pick sixes from Taekwon Lang at the beginning and the end. The Devin Johnson go-ahead touchdown there in the last couple minutes. Just epic stuff. Loudest that the Jones ever been. Most Marshall fans ever to see Marshall play a football game, in my opinion. I think that's definitely the case. The most Marshall fans ever at a game for Marshall. There's been few bigger crowds, but they had a lot of opposing fans there. Most of the fans at this game, 99% of the fans at this game were Marshall fans. Can't say that about WVU. Can't say that about Louisville in a couple years. So it is what it is. Amazing game. And then 2016, I just said it, the Louisville game, that was when they were number 3 and had Lamar Jackson. That's not even the game I wrote down. We lost that game, obviously. Amazing environment for about a quarter and a half. But the game I wrote down from 2016 was Pitt, because a lot of people don't remember this game. I was there. Marshall looks like completely inept. Everything was inept. They were down 27-0 at the half in this game. They rally all the way back. They end up cutting the lead to 30-27. Chase Litton and Michael Clark did work to that Pitt defense. They absolutely lit them up. And they had it. They had him. They had him the third down. I remember this so well. It was just like watching a horror movie. They had him down to third down, Pitt, and Marshall if Marshall gets one stop and they get the ball back, Pitt hadn't stopped them the entire second half. Marshall probably goes down and scores and wins the game. But then Pitt gets a 54-yard touchdown. Game over at that point. And then to add insult to injury, they get a late pick six in the final seconds to make it look even worse. 43-27 win. But it was much closer than that. Much closer than that. And if Marshall doesn't get down 27-0 at the half, safe to assume they have a fantastic chance to win that game. But we'll never know. And then 2017, another really solid performance for a while at least. You go on the road at NC State, another game against NC State. Marshall loses 37-20, but I think that there was a lot more optimism around this game than negativity. Marshall's up 20-10 at the half. They're playing very, very well. Tyree Brady has an all-time performance in this game. 11 receptions, 248 yards, and 1 touchdown. The Carter Finley Stadium record for receiving yards for an opposing team's player. And I think that still is the record. Really, at least it was. But unfortunately, NC State outscores Marshall 27-0 in the second half. Very unideal, as you would say. So that sucked. But that was also the season right after the fact that we just went 3-9 the year before. So this was like, okay, this Marshall team might be better than people think. And they ended up being a solid team that year. And then, like you said, they did beat Cincinnati that year, but I didn't even write that down just because they were in the American at the time. So I was like, that really doesn't count as a power. But still, that was a fantastic win. I was at that game too. But yeah, so 2017, great win against Cincinnati, an American team. And then they played well for at least 2 quarters against an ACC team that was solid. So not a bad track record there. And then 2018, and real quick, I wanted to mention as well, they also played NC State home and home, the second game of the home and home series. This time it was at the Joan. We lose 37-20 again, same exact score. Although I think, and I remember saying this in the moment, that the first game against NC State the year before, despite it being the same score, I felt better about that game than this game. This game, we kind of were behind most of it. Like we really weren't even ahead. But this was the game that Jaquan Yulee lit up a guy on the kick return, and they ran it back for a touchdown. Epic moment. Absolutely epic moment. So that was worth it in its own right. So talking about those few games right there before we move on to the 2020s, because that's when it starts really picking up for some marquee stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like going into a time capsule, man. You're mentioning that NC State game. I remember that so vividly.
Yeah.
Man, they had that he went to the NFL. His name is escaping me. That really tall quarterback for NC State.
Ryan Finley.
I'm pretty sure that's him. He was like 6'7", but the dude he's a pretty good quarterback. But overall, that game was we had it in the bag. And same with Pitt. I can vividly remember that Pitt game as well. I watched it on TV. Me and my dad did, and I mean, and that's why Pitt's never wanted to reschedule or make up some of the games that they dropped us with. I mean, they
had a home and home with us
anymore. I mean, and I don't blame them. I mean, they don't want to get. Can you imagine? Again, this is probably not the administration side, but just can you imagine if Marshall beats Pitt, the overall just sentiment from the entire state of West Virginia that would come at them. That would just be insane.
Yeah.
So I mean, all of those games that you just mentioned, it's just like you're close, but you're just not over that hump yet. And I think the main culprit in that particular season of Marshall athletics was the fact that here in the Conference USA, you're not getting the caliber of players that you used to. Really, college football had evolved to this point. There was now becoming a separation between your bigger programs and your smaller programs. And so here Marshall is, they had been left behind tragically in conference realignment. They're not a part of what the Big East would become in the American. They're not making the same type of money, that's for sure. And they definitely are not having the same level of competition. Conference USA went from being arguably like the second best group of 5 or 6, just depending on what you want to call the Big East, to being like the third from last. I mean, the Mountain West was better, the American was better, and it could be argued even some years that the MAC was better because you had that Northern Illinois team around that time that popped off, did some great things, and Western Michigan too. So it was definitely tough sledding in these years, because you're in a really worse position. One of the worst positions that Marshall had ever been at. I'm thankful for the Sun Belt today in some capacity. Obviously, the regional rivalries and stuff like that. Oh, it's awesome. I love that aspect of it. But at the same time, too, I really do wish Marshall was at a better overall position than they are at this present moment. And that might change. We'll see. They're heading in the right direction. They've got some great leadership. And, we might do an episode on that one day. But But here we are, and Marshall has gotten to the point where now we're winning some of these bigger games. Again, Cincinnati was still in the American, but this is not that far off from whenever they would go off and be a top 4 team and go in the playoff.
Right.
So it's not that big of a difference. As a matter of fact, I think Desmond Ridder might have been on the team. He didn't play in that game when Chase Litton was down there in Cincinnati, but he might have been on that team like as a freshman or something.
Yeah.
So, overall, they're getting to a place where they're close, but just not close enough. And I think a lot of that has to do with just how bad it was playing in the Conference USA, not being able to get the same type of players that you would normally get. And it stunk. It is what it is. But the 2020s are coming, and when they come, so is some of the most signature wins that we have ever seen in our entire school's history.
Couldn't have said it better. I mean, it was just a huge difference from what we had been seeing. And yeah, it was amazing. And we're going to talk about it. But from it's funny because, we talked about 2017 and 2018 with NC State, but for about 3 seasons, we didn't play a power conference team for 3 seasons. But what we did do was we played some of the best group of 5 teams in the country. And that was a conceded effort by administration at the time. They wanted, because they knew they were trying to compete for that group of 5 access bowl slot, the Peach Bowl, Fiat, whatever, the New Year's Six. They were competing for that. So they tried to schedule the best group of 5 teams they could. And in 2019, they play Cincinnati, who ended up being a 10-win team that year, with Desmond Ridder as a quarterback. They lit us up in Huntington. 2019, we also go at Boise State, lose a very close game in that one, top 25 Boise State team. 2020, we get a huge win over a ranked Appalachian State team out of the Sun Belt. Great win. 2021, we don't play a Power 4, Power 5, whatever team either, but we do play App State. We play Navy. So we're playing quality mid-major programs. But then 2022, that all changes because we go on the road at Notre Dame, number 8 ranked team at the time. They had a competitive close loss at Ohio State in week 1. And this was the first home game for Marcus Freeman. Everybody's like, oh, roll out the red carpet. Notre Dame's this is going to be great. Marcus Freeman's first home game as a head coach. Well, you caught that L, Marcus, didn't you? 26-21. I would say maybe not the best team we've ever beaten, but I would say it's the biggest brand name team we've ever beaten by far. Notre Dame is a Mount Rushmore team of college football history. And we beat them 26-21. Amazing, legendary performance. We're winning at the half. We're winning through most of the third quarter. But then Notre Dame, to their credit, they do get the lead midway through the fourth quarter. They end up going up 15-12 on us. And then it takes a memorable drive from Henry Colombi, who was the starting quarterback at the time. He leads a great drive and gets him all the way down into scoring position. And on third down, I believe it was third down, he hits Devin Miller for a 3-yard touchdown with 5:16 left of the game that put Marshall up 19-15. And you're thinking, well, could we actually do this? This is really, it was right there. And then Notre Dame's next possession, we found out for certain that we could do it because Stephen Gilmore runs back an interception, 37 yards for a touchdown to put Marshall up 26-15 with 4:35 to go of the game. And I don't even have the words to explain what I was going through at that moment when he ran that pick 6 back. It was, it was like euphoria, it was like an out of body experience. And, Notre Dame did ultimately get a touchdown in the last 10 or 15 seconds to give them a chance to kick an onside kick. But of course they didn't get the onside kick and we pulled it out. But one of the most legendary wins of all time for Marshall football, best signature brand name opponent we've ever beaten, second highest team we've ever beaten. Kansas State was number 6. So this is about the same as that. And that was a good Notre Dame team. They weren't as obviously as good as they would end up being in the next couple of years with like Jeremiah Love and all those guys. But this was still a 9-win Notre Dame team that won a bowl game, finishing at top 25. So not a bad team at all. And Marshall goes there and wins in just like the hallowed ground of South Bend, Indiana. Touchdown Jesus and all. I mean, Marshall's it was legendary. Absolutely legendary. Got to give Charles Huff credit for that. I know we joke about him a lot, but that was massive. And I don't know if they get that win based on the trajectory that they were at. I don't know if they get that win with Doc Holliday. And Doc, is a legendary coach for Marshall history, but I don't know if they get that win if he's the coach and if that's still his program, because things had kind of stagnated the last couple of years for him. And man, they picked it up big time in this one. This was just iconic. And then the next season, to their credit, they turned it right back around again, get a home game against Virginia Tech. This was a game they ended up agreeing to a home and home because if you remember back in 2018, a couple games got canceled because of weather, and Virginia Tech was sitting there at 5-6 that year, and they needed to play somebody else to get that 6th win to get to a bowl game because they had like a 18, 19, 20-year bowl streak on the line. So we agreed to play them in 2018 in Blacksburg, and then they agreed to a home and home after that. And this was the home game for Marshall. Big crowd on hand, striped the stadium. This was a great environment, great performance. Marshall wins 24-17, and this was like the first time they had beaten Virginia Tech since like 1940 or something. So great game here. Marshall leads the majority of the game. Tech came out of the gate strong, but the Herd was up at the half. They actually got up 14 points, 24-10, but then Tech gets it down to 24-17. Kyron Drones played pretty well for him this game. Marshall gets a 4th down stop in the last minute of the game that sealed the win. And then Ali had a big game running the ball for us, 174 yards. I mean, so great game there. And, that was a great moment for the program. And then the last game to talk about is 2023 at NC State. We've talked about that one as well. You said you were there. Marshall goes there, and, man, we played NC State a lot, haven't we?
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. So, we go down there again this time, but we lose a close game again, 48-41. Really good game. We were up 24-21 at the half. A lot of offense. Cam Fancher was still playing. He was still starting at this point. He was playing well. But then NC State, after we were up by 3 at the half, they kind of turned it on there in the 3rd and 4th quarter. They were up 48-34 late in the game before we scored a touchdown in the last couple minutes to get it down to 7. But then we didn't get any closer than that. But really solid performance still. I mean, the NC State was a good team that year. They're always a good team. So that was a solid performance. I just wish we could beat them finally because we've got a lot of close games against NC State. And then, of course, 2024, we lose to Ohio State, play well in the first half. Then we lose to Virginia Tech that year as well. And then 2025, we get smoked by Georgia. So that's pretty much up to date, on everything we've done in recent years. So talk about those 2020 game performances against these big-time opponents because, man, we had 2 massive wins.
Yeah, I mean, well, this is like a golden age, really, because, man, one of the biggest regrets I've got in my life is not going to Notre Dame.
Same.
My dad and I talked about it, and, we were thinking, well, maybe, and I was living in North Carolina at the time, so it was a long trip, and I was like, yeah, why don't you just come down here, we'll watch it together, and, we'll spend the weekend, do a couple things and whatnot. So I remember, man, we got some food, brought it home, some barbecue. We were on our couches just watching the game, and I just couldn't believe it. And shout out to my favorite quarterback in all of human history, Tyler Buckner. His 2-touchdown performance for Marshall that day is something that I will never forget in my entire life. Marshall legend, and if he ever comes to Huntington, I'll buy him some fat patties or something. I mean, he's an all-timer in my book. And I love that game because I remember the conversation that I was having on social media. It's actually really, that was the year that I started this whole social media journey for me. That's kind of like got us to here in the podcast, like from my end. That's whenever my, I guess you could say, burner account became something that was more than just, 2 likes, but I'm getting some followers, getting some likes, different stuff. And the conversation heading in there was like, all right, if we were ever going to play Notre Dame, this is probably the best time that we could ever play them. Like, they're always going to be good. They're still good in that particular year, but they had some problems, and new coach, new system, had to replace a lot of guys. Brian Kelly took a lot of guys with him. So it was the perfect storm of just everything coming together. And man, we shocked the entire nation. That entire Saturday was crazy because in the same day you had Georgia Southern beat Nebraska. You had App State beat Texas A&M. I mean, it was called Sun Belt Saturday, just one of the best days ever as a new Sun Belt Conference member and as a fan of the Sun Belt and all that good stuff. So really cool day. And I'll talk about this in just a moment, but I have got the exact same feeling about Penn State that I did against Notre Dame. Now, if it will be the same result, I'm not saying it will one way or the other. But if you were to ever play Penn State, a team that is usually ranked in the top 10, a team that's going to be in the playoff conversation, in the Big Ten conversation, on all of those fronts, I would say that this is most definitely the year to play them. Very similar circumstances. You didn't fire Brian Kelly. He accepted a new job. Penn State fires James Franklin, which is still. I'm sure we'll talk about this probably in the episode where we kind of break down everything about the games and whatnot. But it's still just a very, very strange move to me. I know that he wasn't able to get you over the proverbial hump, but I mean, losing like 2 games a season, that's pretty good.
Right.
And they might be hurting because of that. But, new coach, brand new system, almost entirely new team. Hey, if we were ever going to play them, I'd like the chances of playing them this year than I would in 2 or 3 years down the road. That's for sure. But then to the point too, the very next season playing Virginia Tech, one of the games that you look back and you wish it would have been just a little bit different, almost a perfect day. Grant Wells gets benched that week. Man, how fun would that have been if he was starting quarterback, and maybe he would have been able to get just another touchdown from Marshall. Who knows? But he didn't see the field, sadly. But still, yeah, it was a good game. Went down to the wire there. I mean, not super to the wire, but it was close the entire way, and you were kind of on the edge of your seat. But Marshall, pretty much, I never was nervous really in that game, quite honestly. Like, we had a really solid team, and we had Rasheen Ali. What else do you need? So yeah, winning that game was huge. Again, that's probably, I would say that's more of an important win. It's not as fun, but it's more of an important win than it was against Purdue. Maybe even the most important home win that we had seen in a long time. Because, I mean, Virginia Tech's close. And truthfully, I like playing Virginia Tech. I think that we're not necessarily rivals. We got a lot of respect for each other in our programs. Yeah. But still, that was just a really, really fun and a cool game. And then you mentioned NC State. I was at the game, sitting with all the Marshall fans. And, man, just looking back, if we would have had a quarterback that could have thrown the ball just a little bit, that would have been a different, outcome. It was a very similar circumstance. The quarterback that they had leading into the game got benched right beforehand. I think it was a guy from Virginia transferred in for his final season. I don't remember his name. He was kind of a polarizing guy. Everybody knew him, but he wasn't that great, obviously. Got benched. Yeah. And you have this new quarterback in. He could run, and he lit us up. I mean, he just did. There were some mistakes. He threw a couple picks, but they were throwing that quick pass, that motion the receiver, and it was almost basically a handoff, but he would just lob it. He had like 400-something yards passing, quote unquote. It was more or less just a fancy run game. But yeah, still yet they're at the back end of the game, just some pivotal mistakes. Defense, again, for letting up like, I don't remember how many points exactly, 48 points maybe. Didn't play bad. Had a couple turnovers, really big moments, key moments. but just couldn't do it. But overall, though, from the last 5 years of Marshall football, I think that we have gained the overall mentality once again that we had in the 2000s, and that is, again, we're just not afraid to play you. We don't really care if you're Ohio State. We don't care if you're Alabama. We don't care if you're this, that, and everything in between. We're just here to play some football. Owen Porter said it best, strap them up, spot the ball. Let's go for it. Let's play the game. And looking at these numbers that, all the experts have it, I think that we are a 24.5 point underdog. That's what the odds experts are saying. And DSPN has got us at a 4.5% chance of winning the game outright. So lots of disrespect. And quite frankly, I understand it. Going 5-7 last year, that's nothing, that's just not going to do it, especially playing in a Sun Belt that really, James Madison was great. Everybody else wasn't so great. So, but with that said, I look at the people that we have retained. All of your big playmakers, with the exception of Floyd Lacey, who graduated, they're back. Like they didn't go anywhere. The running back room is a little questionable. We have some question marks, but that's not even to say that that's going to be bad. Joshawn Barbie, he's seeming to be a stud, and we brought in some guys too. And I look at all of the factors surrounding Penn State as well. Matt Campbell's first year, and truthfully, I know it was Iowa State, but it's been a long time since he's had a really solid season too.
Right.
He kind of got comfortable there with like a 7 to 8 wins a year over the course of the last couple of years at his tenure. So I don't really think he's going to be the savior of Penn State, as some of these, fans are saying, per se. If there ever was a time to play him, man, it's this year. I will say this, though. They got a pretty good quarterback. It's not Tyler Buckner that's being thrown out there. Rocco Becht is a solid starter. He's got some good numbers and different things. Also playing in the Big 12, which they don't really have a ton of defense. That might be something that can go in our favor. But looking at Marshall, we've retained a lot. We've got a new defensive coordinator, and I know that we're just going to see a vastly improved defense. It doesn't have to be much better to be vastly improved either. We just couldn't do anything. We couldn't defend the pass at all. We couldn't defend the run at all. If you had a mobile quarterback, you would run for 1,000 yards, no problem. Honestly, it was a disaster last season. So anything on and improving that side of the ball is going to help, obviously. But the offense is really, I think, going to start to produce some big numbers, because you've got a quarterback that's 1 year in. He's comfortable with the system. You've got a really solid receiving core that I'm excited about. This receiving core reminds me of those old school Marshall teams where you just had some physical guys, you had some flat out fast guys that's going to outrun you, and you had a quarterback that he's big, he can move a little bit, but if Carlos is able to stay in the pocket and throw the ball downfield, I think that is really going to be the key. So, hey, you never know. I'm excited for this game. I really am. And, you might call me crazy. Some fans might already be like, well, we're doomed because it's Penn State and there's going to be 106,000 people in the stands. And, they've got all this excitement with the new coach and Rocco Becht's a good quarterback and all that stuff. But that don't scare me, man. We've beaten better teams. We've stayed close with better teams. So, the fact that they're Penn State does nothing for me. It's just like any other game. If Marshall shows up and they play to what they are able to play, they could turn a lot of heads in Happy Valley. A lot of sad faces could be coming to Happy Valley if they are able to play up to the standard that I know Coach Gibson's trying to get them to play to, and just the overall mentality that they need to have is, again, we're just not scared.
Right.
This is nothing to us. This is just another game, and I think that is going to be the mentality, because after that tough last year We're now moving forward. We're getting that behind us. We've got a lot of guys that are on a bunch of watch lists for awards and different things. So, I don't hate our chances. I wouldn't say I necessarily like them, but I don't hate them either. And, we'll just have to see what happens on September 5th. I'm excited for this game.
Absolutely. And, I've thought this, and I think I've even put something on Twitter about this. I kind of view this both Marshall this year. I would say that they're very comparable to Marshall in 2022, if not a little bit better, maybe. And I would say that Notre Dame in 2022 is going to be very comparable to Penn State right now. This is not a Penn State team that's going to win 12 or 13 games. They're just not. They're not going to win the Big Ten. They're not going to make the playoff. They're not going to be a top 10 team. They're not going to be that. But they're a solid team. I mean, they're basically Iowa State, like they're solid. They're going to be good. I mean, Rocco Beck's to your point, Rocco Beck is a versatile player. He's dynamic, but he's also kind of a turnover machine at times too. So if we can pick him off a couple of times, who knows? I mean, I'm not saying that, I'm not saying he's bad, but like this, he's got a lot of hype over the last year or two. And I've watched him and I just haven't quite seen that kind of hype warranted. I'm not saying he's a bad player, but if you want to look at him in the light of all the other great quarterbacks in the country, no, I don't think he really compares. He's a good player, but I also think we can do some work to him if we get the, if we're doing our thing, I think we can make some hay with him, but we'll see. I don't know. But as far as just this, wrapping up this episode, we've had a lot of success with power conference opponents. Even in losses, we've had a lot of success. I know you don't look for moral victories. We're not into moral victories. That's just not it. But they're not moral victories as much as they are like eyebrow raisers, respect gainers. Like there's a difference. Like a moral victory would be, a winless team scoring a touchdown or something. That's a moral victory. This is one that, despite some close losses, Ohio State, Georgia, Virginia Tech, NC State, whatever. Those are games even in defeat where you gain some respect. And I think that we're in a position to do that again with Penn State. Looking at it in the next couple of years, we'll have some chances as well. 2027, we're at Alabama, playing them for the first time ever. And then 2028, we're at Wisconsin. And Wisconsin has not been great here in the last decade or so, 5-10 years. They have not been great. So they might be able to be had at that point. I don't know. We'll have to see what we got. But yeah, I'm very excited to look at this Penn State game coming up because there's a lot of bullet points. There's a lot of talking points to go over with this game and our roster and all that. We're going to do the season preview where we'll go through the games, look at the roster, pick the season, record and stuff. And then we're going to preview Penn State as well. So it's going to be a loaded episode in a couple weeks. And next week, I believe we're doing the unanswered questions episode where we look at some, I don't know how many yet. We'll figure that out. What kind of unanswered questions that we have heading into the 2026 season for the Herd and what we hope to see happen with those unanswered questions. But I mean, as far as our, history with power conference opponents, basically what I gathered from this is if you just look at if it's just straight math, from the time we were an FBS program, basically we're good for at least, I would say we're good for one win every 3 or so years against a team like that. Because if you look at the numbers, if you count up the wins, I count 8. And, we've played 29 FBS seasons since 97, I think, 29. So if you do the math, it's about 4, I guess, whatever, 3 or 4. So, and even when we're not winning them, we're competitive. For more times than not, we're competitive. And the last time we beat a Power 4 team, Power whatever team, was 2023. So it's 2026. It's 3 years. We're due. I'm just saying we are due for one. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm excited about it for sure, our chances and what we can do this season. So before we close it up, any last thoughts? Anything you want to get out before we wrap things up?
Well, and I'm not trying to discredit Matt Campbell by any means whenever I say this, but I'm just looking at the schedules that they've had post COVID. 2021, 7-6, not lighting up the world.
No.
2022, 4-8, not lighting up the world. 2023, 7-6, not lighting up the world. The only season that he's won 10 plus games in was 2024. They went 11-3, and then from that last season was 8-4. So I'm just being honest with you. I know that a lot of Penn State fans will say something along the lines of, well, he did it at Iowa State. That's the most impressive part of it. But the thing about it is, though, he was there for a long time. You know, I mean, his tenure there, he's probably the best coach Iowa State's ever had. And he has implemented so many just great fundamental things for that program. And he wasn't really able to get past, 10 wins, I don't think, really. That was the only season that, from my understanding, looking at the records, he had 1 10-win season. This is not going to be a team. They're going to be a solid team, all right? I'm not trying to discredit that. They're going to be okay. Like, they're going to beat Purdue, all right? Like, that's not going to be an issue. They're going to beat Northwestern. Those types of games will be no problem. But this team is not going to light the world on fire, okay? They're going to be good offensively, but they're not going to be flashy. They're not going to be outstanding. You're not going to sit back and say, wow. I mean, they just have elite athletes. They might have superior athletes, but they're not going to be elite. This is not the same type of game like us going to Ohio State, okay? This is not the same thing. This is a team that is brand new, that has come together recently. Again, some big names, and you're always going to get some big recruits. But even at that, these are not the biggest names in the entire nation. So, hey, that's why we play this game. And I'm thankful that we got a Penn State on our schedule here, because really, if you're going to go and beat one of the blue bloods of college football today, I think Penn State is one of those teams that is beatable. Now, if we do that or not, I don't know. I'm not predicting that we're going to win. We'll predict that later. Yeah. But what I will say is that we're going to have a really good shot. We're going to have a really good opportunity. First game ever that Matt Campbell has got. That he's going to be nervous as all get out. He has never coached a home crowd along those lines. And truthfully, an entire fan base that's so frustrated that if things are going bad by halftime, don't be surprised if they get booed going into halftime. I mean, I'm just telling you, like they're so fed up with James Franklin for winning 10 games. I mean, can you imagine if you're losing to Marshall at halftime? They're going to be really upset. How do you respond to that? So it's going to be interesting. And like I said, I don't necessarily love our chances, but I most definitely don't hate our chances. I look forward to September 5th. And it's going to be a fun day. I think no matter what, it's going to be. It's not going to be a 24.5 point game. I don't think it's going to be that far. I think it'll be a lot closer.
I agree, and we're going to get a whole lot more into that in a couple of weeks. But I agree with you 100%. You talked about people saying that he was able to do that at Iowa State. Okay, I mean, okay, but like they're saying that as if Iowa State is. Rutgers in the Big Ten. That's not the level Iowa State's at. Iowa State, like at its core, Iowa State is about a middle of the road Big 12 team. Like that's where they are. If you look at, every metric you want to look at, that's where they are. So like he basically did exactly what you would expect a good coach to do at Iowa State. Like he had a couple great years, had some solid years, had some kind of dud years, but like he did pretty much what you would expect. And talked about James Franklin a little bit too. It's like it'd be kind of funny, and I can't quite pull the trigger on this, but I'm very close to believing that in year one at Virginia Tech, James Franklin may have more wins than Penn State does. with Matt Campbell. I'm very, very close to saying that.
I would agree.
He's pulling in some recruits, and this isn't the Big Ten where that was why James Franklin got fired, because he couldn't beat Penn State and Michigan. Or not Penn State, Ohio State and Michigan. But in the ACC, Miami's coming on. Miami's back. But outside of that, Clemson's not what they used to be. And, there's a lot of teams that they can beat in the ACC. So, I'm not saying that like they're going to go in and win it in year one, but I'm saying that he's going to make them at a level where they haven't been at since Beamer. And I'm not talking about late Beamer. I'm talking like 2000s, late 2000, early 2010 Beamer. That, good Tech teams. So,
yeah, don't be surprised if you see them in the playoff in 3 years. I'm just saying it that way. Don't be surprised if you see them win 9 games this year.
Absolutely.
Because the ACC, man, you got SMU, you've got Louisville, and then you have a small gap, then Clemson, then a big gap, Miami. So the level of competition is nowhere close to what the Big Ten is. He's got some guys that is at Virginia Tech. And quite frankly, I don't really want Marshall to schedule Virginia Tech for a little bit because they're going to be good. I'm just telling you right now, they're going to be a very good program.
Absolutely. And even in these recent years where they haven't been very good, boy, Lane Stadium's jumping. It is bouncing every single game, packed. So when you get genuine enthusiasm and genuine excitement back into the program again, it's going to be off the charts. And college football is better when Virginia Tech is good. I'm just saying I've believed that for years. And I know we've completely gone off into a tirade and a tangent here, but, we're so excited to talk about football, so we're just going with it. But, yeah, I'm pumped to talk about Marshall and Penn State in a couple of weeks and look at that season closer. And like I said, this wraps up season 1 of the podcast officially. Nothing changes. It's just the numbers show up different on the episodes. But so we're looking forward to that next week, season 2, beginning with unanswered questions. We're going to look at that and get into the crux of the season. So I'm pumped for it. So that being said, go Herd, and we will see y'all next time.